Hi, this is Kathy Krusen, and you're listening to the People's Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome on in to episode number 9 of the People Podcast, and I have a treat for everybody this week and next week actually, because we have Kathy Krusen as the star of the show. She is a fencer and fencing instructor in the Bay Area, and that's right, you're listening to the Oops, I Did It Again instrumental, because I did it again. I did another 2-part interview with one of my guests, but listen, that just means that I had a meaningful, long, and impactful conversation with somebody, and that's really what this show is all about. So, can you blame me? Part 1 is this week's edition of the People Podcast, and in Part 1, Kathy's going to talk about how she started the sport of fencing, what's the most nervous she's ever been when she was face-to-face with another fencer, and so much more. Thanks for joining the ride, and let's get to it. Kathy Krusen, Part 1, fencer and fencing instructor in the Bay Area. All right, I'm really excited to get into the world of fencing with Kathy Krusen, who is a longtime fencing enthusiast. She has both competed in the sport and currently coaches the sport at Halberstadt Fencers Club in San Francisco, as well as other places in the Bay Area. Kathy, thanks for joining the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Well, let's start at the beginning, Kathy. You've been involved in the sport for almost 50 years, I believe, and you started fencing by chance at UC Santa Cruz in 1977. Can you explain how that happened?
I had a friend that graduated a year before me, and she went off to college, and she was writing me letters, and she said, I've taken up this really cool sport. It's fencing, and they're really nice people, and I'm having a great time, and you should try it. And so I thought, sure, why not? And I went to UC Santa Cruz, and they had fencing there, and I decided to give it a try. And the coach there, Charles Selberg, was very charismatic. I mean, he would just have 60 people who cared nothing about sports, probably. They'd show up for his class and listen to his lectures, and his stories were great, and he made it so interesting. And then after a couple of quarters, there would be people that were really dedicated to the actual sport of fencing, and I was totally hooked by that time. I took every fencing class they had, and I changed my major so that I only had one major instead of a double major, and I took every class I could take, and I've been doing it ever since.
That's so fun. I imagine at UC Santa Cruz there must have been some influence to surfboard out there.
Well, I never had the urge to surfboard because I don't like the ocean that much. I like to look at it from up on land, but they had a very low key athletic program. No major team sports. It was all about participation. There was no credit, and so people really just gravitated to the classes that interested them the most. And I've always been sort of athletic, but team sports always sort of left me feeling not so great, because if the team won, I felt like, well, I didn't do much. And if the team lost, then I felt like, oh, it's all my fault. But when you do an individual sport like fencing, it's all on you. You know, you don't have to worry about other teammates. If you fail, it was pretty much your fault, or maybe the other person was just really, really good. But it was a great change for me, having come from baseball, soccer, all those, basketball, all those things. I loved it.
You've been training at Halberstadt Fencers Club in San Francisco for a while now, and you've been both an instructor, a coach, since 1988, 11 years after you first found the sport. How were you able, Kathy, to work your way up from training at the facility to then teaching at the facility?
Well, it sort of just, it kind of progressed. it's a strange thing, but when I was at Santa Cruz, I took this really bizarre class called Birth of a Poet, and we were supposed to find our vocation in life. And I was looking back through papers, and I thought, I found this paper I wrote for that class, and it said, "What do you want to be? What's your vocation?" And I said, "Well, maybe I'll be a fencing teacher." And then I put it away, and I continued on with my life. And after I got back from a few years out of the state, I was back in the Bay Area, and one of the fencing coaches in the area called my husband and myself. We met fencing, and said he was now coaching at Halberstadt, and would we like to come up there and train with him? And that was in 1988, I think, or 85, maybe it was. I don't know. But that was with Peter Burchard. And so we came up and started fencing with him. And there was just this incredibly driven group of fencers, and we were all fencing all the time. And I spent 2/3 of my social time at the fencing club, and I was trying to learn all I could about it. And for me personally, I really need to know how to do something, like technically. And so I took a lot of lessons, and I watched a lot of coaching and watched a lot of the fencing. And of course, since I was there all the time, the coach just said, "Well, I need some help with classes." And pretty much in the beginning, I was just there to put these little kids, to zip up their jackets so he wouldn't have to just zip up a million jackets all, for the whole class time. And then I started to actually run some of the classes a little bit and give a little mini lessons. And before you know it, I was thinking, yeah, maybe this is. I mean, it was definitely fun. It was easy because I was there all the time, and it was just a blast to teach something that I enjoyed so much. It just sort of melded itself into a new thing.
And I've always believed, Kathy, that in any sport, it really takes a certain kind of individual to be a successful coach, because it's not always the best or the most skilled players or athletes who become the best coaches, because you really have to work with people. You have to be patient with people. There must have been a moment where you realized, like, you could do this.
I think that along the way, there have been some lessons that I've learned, either from teachers that have really known who I was and could teach to me as an individual, not just teach their subject, or like my first fencing coach, Charles Selberg, he would say that the student-teacher relationship is it's very important to understand the boundaries of that, the limits of it, and your purpose. You can't make anybody do anything. You can only show them, get them to feel it, explain it to them, have them practice it. And so there's a certain amount of cooperation that the student gives over to the coach, and then there's a certain amount of responsibility that the coach takes on because the student gives that to them. And I find that coaching actually helped me understand who I was as a fencer, as an individual competitor, more than I had been able to understand myself. I hated losing. If I lost, I was in a funk. And I had the Olympian George Nonomura, who used to train at our club. He once said to me, he goes, Kathy, there are athletes who hate to lose, and there are athletes that love to win. And I was in a grumpy mood that day, and so I was like, oh, come on, George, what is this? But he said, the best athletes are the ones who love to win. because when they lose, they just learn from it, integrate their learning into their tactics, and then move on. Whereas the athlete who hates to lose has short circuits that learning from their losses because they're so emotional. They're so devastating. And I had never had anybody sort of point something out to me so well. It would have been nice if he had given me a secret, as to how to change myself. But I guess that was my job. But, learning these things and seeing the people you're coaching struggle with these very same emotional undercurrents and the pressure of winning and losing and the desire to lose yourself in the moment of what you're doing, it's all been very, very captivating. And I feel that I have a particular sensitivity to the more emotional, the more I hate to lose fencers than some other coaches have, because I've been so engulfed in that at times.
But that's why I really admire coaching, Kathy, is because you said, you can't totally instill that love to win in other people, but you have to be patient with them, you have to work with them and believe in them when they might not believe in themselves.
Well, I have to say that in fencing for the last 20 years, that has been particularly true because a lot of people that come to fencing have not had very much success in what we call traditional sports, team sports. And so a lot of the people that come in and fence with us at first, especially if they're middle school or high school age, and they haven't found their sport yet, they really don't think they're athletes. And they're, usually a little in their head. They're usually very competitive. They usually come to it because they love games and they love strategy, but they may not be the most athletic person. They can't just pick up anything and do it. And I particularly like those students because you have to go through a whole history of breaking down their beliefs that they don't know how to move their body. They don't know how to, they're not strong enough. They're not fast enough. And it's just so gratifying, so lovely to see them sort of blossom into these athletes and who have confidence in their ability to use their body to do something. And it's really, I mean, coaches get a lot of credit for doing that, but I mean, it's a lot of fun to do that. It's almost more fun to do that for someone else than it was doing it for myself. I mean, I'm a much better coach than I was a competitor because I was a bit of a head case. I just couldn't figure out how to win. And that's probably the problem, So my goal has always just been to introduce as many people as I can to the sport that helped me see who I was better. I mean, I think I found out just so much more about myself through fencing, through persevering, through hard times and dealing with successes than I had ever had in any other sport. Yeah, it really changed my life. I mean, before I had been a fencer, you would never have been able to ask me to talk about myself and find anything positive to say. I was just very sarcastic, critical, negative, all those things. And you see them for what they are after a while. You see them as defenses, and you see them as things that get in your way. When you want to put your foil point on your opponent's target, you can't be thinking about things that aren't real. you have to be right there trying to figure out how to get there. And they're doing everything in their capabilities to keep you from doing that. And it's really exciting when it all kind of works. And it feels almost like magical, like you didn't do it, but you did. It's just so egoless, you're just there and doing all the things that you practiced for all that time. It's really, it's a gas. I've never had that kind of experience with any other sport or endeavor. I mean, I'm sure people out there have it. Like, I'm sure that when you learn to play piano and you do all those scales and you do all those silly songs and you do all that practice, that it's all toward that goal of getting to the point where you can lose yourself in a piece you're playing. And that's the kind of what fencing did for me that nothing else ever had.
You've competed, Kathy, at the local, national, and international level in fencing competitions yourself. But when you're standing there, like you were just talking about, you're trying to get your foil point on your opponent's target. They're right across from you. What's the most nervous you've ever been for a fencing match?
Oh, geez. Well, I remember at one of my first major fencing competitions, I was at a very large event in Oakland, and I'd only been fencing for about 5 years, and I was up against this woman who was the prior national champion, and she just looked tough. She just looked like she owned the whole strip, and I was so nervous I could barely plug in my weapon. There was no brain wave that was intelligible in my head. And I remember that being a particularly nerve-wracking time. There are other times where you get on the strip and you're almost like too friendly. You're not like, you want the person to like you, or you think they're really good, and so it can be good to be really nervous, because then you're primed, your nervous system is going. But on that one, I was just over the top. I remember I was retreating backwards to get away from her because she was pretty fast, and I fell over backwards, did a backward flip, and then sort of just rolled back over and came up and stood up, and she was looking at me like, oh my God, I've never seen anyone do that. And I felt like such a fool. But there you go. That's what happens.
That's fun. Well, speaking of the actual fencing play, I always assumed it was just with one traditional sword, but there's actually 3 different weapons in modern fencing: the foil, the épée, and the saber. What are the main differences between those 3 weapons?
Well, each one of them is, like you say, a weapon, and each one is designed to hit your opponent. But the way you hit and the area that you can hit is different in each one. So in saber, it's predominantly a cutting weapon, like a cavalry saber or some sort of slicing weapon. You could also poke them if you wanted, but it's much more common to hit with the cutting edge. Since saber has gone electric, it has become the fastest, most attack-based of the 3 weapons, in my opinion. You don't have to hit with the point, and you can hit the person anywhere from the hips up. So the head, the arm, the chest, the back, the flank, anywhere. And all you have to do is make electrical contact between your blade and their target. They wear a metallic vest, or in saber, it's like a full-on jacket. It has sleeves, and then the mask is connected into the whole circuit. So if I cut you in the head with the flat of the blade, I get a touch, or if I hit you in the arm, or if I hit you deep on the target in the chest, all of those count. So saber is a cutting weapon, and epee is, I like to describe it as the closest to an actual dueling situation where the first person to hit gets the point. If you both hit at the same time, well, then you're both killed. You're both hit. And I can hit you anywhere on the body. I can hit you on the pinky toe, the head, the hand, the body. So I have a lot of target available, but I also have a lot of my target available. So in epee, you have double touches where both people get a point at the same time because they made electrical contact with they pushed in the tip within 1/25th of a second, or you can get single touches. And a lot of people, when they watch epee for the first time, they're sort of like, well, there's nothing happening. What's going on? They're just bouncing around. But there's a ton going on. Epee tends to take longer. You have a 3-minute time limit, and some bouts go to that 3 minutes. It used to go to 3 minutes all the time, but people are faster and more aggressive now than ever. So epee is, you have a big bell guard to protect your hand and your arm, and you try to hit them on the arm first because it's closest to you. And if you miss, if you can't hit in the arm, you hit in the elbow. And if you can't hit in the elbow, you hit in the chest. And I find, just an extremely exciting thing to watch. But then again, I've been fencing for 30 years, 40 years. So it's easier for me to see what's going on. And then there's foil. And foil was developed as a practice weapon. When duels were actually happening, you needed to practice hitting to the target that would kill your opponent. So you would practice hitting to the torso, where all the vital organs and squishy things are. And so you would not get a point if you hit on the arm, the head, or the leg, but you'd stop fencing. It's called off target. And then, it'd be like they'd wrap up your wound, and then you'd go out and try for a real touch to the body. So in foil, you have off target and you have on target touches. So it makes the bouts a little more complicated to watch because sometimes all these lights will go off, a white one and a red one, and you'll think, well, why didn't somebody get a point? Well, it's because they hit off target first. And then there's this whole layer of complication, which I won't go into, but with foil developed the right of way, which is a set of rules that keeps there from being double touches. So if I attack you, you can't just attack me too, because I had the right of way. You were under threat. You were going to get killed if you just killed me. So it's sort of to keep you from committing suicide. So you had to parry, you had to protect yourself before you could hit your opponent. And that's when the blade play back and forth that you see in all the, in The Princess Bride and all those movies happens, where I block and then I try to hit and then you block and you try to hit. And there's ways to deceive your opponent so that they go to the wrong place to block. And then you go around and hit them on another side or something, and that's where tactics just sort of explode into different levels, because you're always trying to predict what your opponent is going to do, and you're always trying to train them to do what you want them to do, because then you'll know what's going to happen. When I've gotten up against a very, very good fencer, I feel like they are in my head. And they know what I'm going to do before I do it. And that is a very frustrating feeling, but it is really also the most fun to overcome. And when I go out to fence my students, I'm old and slow and can't possibly do what they can do physically, but I know what they're going to do because I've been fencing all these years. I know how they're going to react. So it's a fascinating game that you can do forever. Like at Halberstadt, we have kids as young as 6 or 7, and we have adults. We have one gal who's, I think she's 85 maybe now, but she's been fencing forever. And she's a lot slower, but she's incredibly tenacious. So she's a force to be reckoned with.
You said that you felt how other fencers have been in your head and they know how you're going to react when you're facing against them. But have you ever felt as a fencer that you were in someone else's head?
Yeah. There was one time I hadn't had a lot of competitive success yet. And UC had this thing called, well, you would all the UCs would send their fencing teams, and you'd have a day of fencing. And we were fencing against, UC Santa Cruz was fencing against UC Berkeley. And their women were really intimidating. And Santa Cruz had sort of a ragtag kind of team, you know. We all had various equipment donated to us, and we didn't have sweats, and they all came in matching gear and everything. And this one day, I had never beaten any of these women, and this one day I was out there, and everything, like, you know, it sounds cliche, but everything sort of slowed down, and I realized that I was usually defensive against this woman, and I thought, no, I can see that if I just go right now, I'll hit her. And I went and I hit her, and you know, all my teammates were like, woo, woo. And my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, he was our stand-in coach, because our coach hated to go to tournaments, but he was coaching from the side, and he didn't know what he was doing, but he was like, okay, now be careful. And I remember distinctly thinking, no, you know, like, now is the perfect time to go. And this time when I go, she's going to do this, and I'm going to go around it and hit her. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And it was like there was tons of time to make all the decisions. And I knew that she would do what I wanted her to do. And it had nothing to do with, like, you know, I'm gonna kick her ass now. But it had everything to do with my strategy being superior to hers, and her inability to get me to follow her. And it was astounding. I'd never had that sort of competitive perfection sort of happen to me. And you know, you hear athletes say it all the time. It's like, yeah, I couldn't seem to do anything wrong, and you know, and it's just like an otherworldly peak experience. And I went through a lot of painful bouts to try to get that feeling back again, because it doesn't stick with you for every time you get out there. I mean, it's just, you compete too often to be in that perfect space. I think that the real champions are the people who can, even when they're not really in that zone, can succeed. But they kind of know how it feels. They know how to get themselves there more times than not. And yeah, that was a great day. It did a lot for my confidence just in general to have this moment of sort of like power. And I remember it. And that was 1981 maybe or something. I mean, that was a long time ago, and I can still feel it.
Well, how about that, huh? That was really fun to learn from Kathy Krusen, fencer and fencing instructor in the Bay Area. You know, we learned about the foil, the épée, and the saber. And I want to know from you, which weapon would you be? Well, think about that question over the next week until part 2 with Kathy Krusen comes out, because she's going to talk about that and a whole lot of other things in the world of fencing, life, and it's just going to be a great time. Episode 10 is going to come next week, so make sure you are subscribing and following the show, and I can't wait to get there.